That is a new type of nonprofit built for the next generation and born into the digital age. TIFF aims to reboot the Zionist spirit to the 21st century by bringing Israel to you and you to Israel, by connecting people around the world through the vibrancy and creativity of contemporary Israeli culture. The profits of its flagship project, which is called Wine on the Vine, offers people from around the world the opportunity to plant grapevines in Israel. And the profits are distributed to one of TIFF's exclusive list of high impact Israeli charities that foster innovation, prosperity, and development for all sectors of Israeli society. Today, I have the pleasure of hosting and welcoming our viewers and our distinguished speakers who will participate in our panel. Unfortunately, author and former MK Einat Wilf is feeling under the weather, so she won't be able to join us. But we are very excited to have the wonderful addition of Lori Palatnik, who is the founding director of Momentum, which is formerly known as JWRP, who I know will have much to add in this discussion for International Women's Day. In addition to founding Momentum, an international nonprofit that together with over 250 partnering organizations in 32 countries, targets and engages the unaffiliated Jewish mother, Lori is a world-renowned Jewish educator, speaker, writer, and media personality. In 2014, Lori was named one of the 10 women to watch by Jewish Women International in recognition of her contribution to Jewish women throughout the world. Hadassah named Lori one of the most outstanding Jewish American women of our time, and Izzy included Lori in its Global Jewish 100 list for moving Jewish culture forward. In 2020, Lori was selected to light the diaspora torch at the national ceremony for Israel's 72nd Independence Day, and Lori lives with her husband in Jerusalem. Next, member of the 23rd Knesset, Michal Cotler-Wunsh, grew up in Canada and serves in 8 Knesset committees, including as the chair of the Diaspora Affairs Subcommittee and chair of the Drug and Alcohol Use Committee, and as member of the Women's Rights and Aliyah, Klita, and Diaspora Affairs Committee, among others. In her 7 months in Knesset, she has come to be known as a voice for Olim, new immigrants, from all backgrounds, pushing for the Israeli government to recognize the contributions of Olim to the country's development, as well as making sure that the unique challenges of Olim don't go unaddressed during the decision-making process. In the area of women's rights, which is particularly relevant to tonight's discussion, she submitted legislation regarding creating affirmative consent policy in Israel, and she also supported the amendment to the legal guardian law that passed in Knesset, which rescinds guardianship from a parent who is convicted or accused of serious criminal offenses, particularly relevant to cases of violence against women. So thank you for joining Michal. Next, we have Fleur Hassan-Nahoum, who grew up in Gibraltar and studied at King's College, London University. She qualified as barrister in Middle Temple in 1997 and practiced in London before immigrating to Israel in 2001. In Israel, she worked at the JDC in resource development for Europe and later became the executive director of Tikva, a nonprofit organization saving abandoned and abused Jewish children from the former Soviet Union. In 2011, she set up her own communications consulting business, Message Experts, and does consulting work for large corporations as well as nonprofit organizations on effective communication strategies. In May 2016, Fleur became a city councilor in Jerusalem, and in February 2017, the leader of the opposition. In November 2018, Fleur was re-elected to the Jerusalem Municipal Council and was appointed deputy mayor for foreign relations, economic development, and tourism. Fleur is currently the only British politician in Israel and is involved in the advancement of women's rights and marginalized population groups in the city, in economic development, and a fight for a pluralistic Jerusalem. Fleur is also the co-founder of the UAE Israel Business Council and the Gulf Women's Forum. We are also very fortunate to have Lital Ra of the Tulip Winery and its sister winery, Maya, which specializes in Mediterranean-style wines. So Lital, to launch this discussion, we'd love to have you tell us a little bit about the wineries you work with and the wine that we'll be tasting, which I have right here.
Okay, wonderful. So good evening, everybody. I hope you all have your wine and a glass of wine ready. Tulip Winery. Tulip Winery was established in 2003 by a family called Itzhaki family, who were and still a huge fan of wine. and decided to establish their own winery. And with all the professional important goals, they also decided to combine some contribution, meaningful contribution to the community with the winemaking. And therefore, they decided to establish the winery from all places in Israel, here in Kfar Tikva, the village of hope, which is a community for grown-up people with special needs, mentally disabled people. It's a very beautiful and special place that people from the age of 21 years old and above who have special needs can come here and live here and be part of a successful community. And they integrate into the winery work, and the winery integrates into the village vision. We're providing today in 2003, we started with creating 6,000 bottles per year and provide jobs for 3 members of the village. Today, we already creating 330,000 bottles per year, and we have the ability to provide jobs for over 40 members of this beautiful community who are working with us, and they are integral part of making each and every bottle of wine of Tulip and Maya. So we believe with all our hearts that if you're doing good thing for the world will bring you back somehow. And this is part of our belief. We also, in every bottle of Tulip Winery, we say we believe that the label you should put in wine bottles and not in people. And that's what's going in front of us. We also have Maya Winery, which is Eliana defined it. I can say it's a sister winery. It's another winery, which a professional in creating Mediterranean style wine. Maya means Mediterranean approach Israeli art, and that's the way we look at it, of the winemaking as an art. And we wish to tell the story of Israel, the culture, the climate, the food, the culinary, everything through that wine of bottle. So when you sip the wine, you feel Israel. The wine we are drinking today called White Frank, one of my favorites, and I can tell you one of the very best seller of the winery. It's a very unique wine. It's a blend between 70% of a red grape called Cabernet Franc, which we take the red grape and we remove the skin from it, not one by one, don't worry about it. And we actually fermenting only the juice inside the red grape. That method called Blanc de Noir, it came, of course, from France, from Champagne area. And we also have here a bit of Sauvignon Blanc, which is a white wine. So that wine is unique in every way you look in it. You can taste it and you can feel it's a bit sweet, but not sweet enough. I mean, not sweet, not too much sweet. It's sweet enough, but not too much sweet. It has enough complexity. It can be suitable for light dishes, but also what we call standalone wine. Just sit with friends or family or your lover, and just enjoy just a bottle of wine without nothing next to it. So I think it's a beautiful wine to be served this night and accompany this beautiful night.
Smells amazing.
Yeah.
L'chaim.
L'chaim.
So Lital, we've previously discussed women in the wine industry in Israel. And I remember you mentioning that some people told you crazy things like you'd be a better marketer than a winemaker because you're a woman, that you had to wear makeup to work, that winemaking was very physical and therefore not a job suited to women. So because it's International Women's Day, I'd like to ask you to please tell us a bit about how you've seen the women's role in the wine industry changing. And I'd also like to know how you view wine as a part of our identity as Jews and Jewish women.
All right. So let's start. We spoke about it, I think, 3 or 4 years ago, and I did told Eliana that someone once told me my dream was to be a winemaker, and someone very important in the wine industry told me that a winemaking it's more suitable for men because it's a physical job, and maybe it's better to me to focus on marketing. Well, I have to say I do enjoy marketing, and I especially enjoy hosting with wine, telling about wine, guiding about wine. But yet I feel sorry about that. About Michal 10 years ago, that was accepted that men selling and didn't go to work the winemaking, just because maybe it's not suitable for women. I still can see, even 3 or 4 years after we spoke, Eliana, I can still see most of the marketing position in the wine industry belong to women, while most of the winemaking position belong to men. But I can see it changing. You can see more and more women who are becoming winemakers. A lot of young women. I can tell you that one of our employees, she's study in the in the Ohio College for winemaking, and she told me that on that year most of the students there are women. So this is a very happy thing to hear, and probably you can see more and more young women who take courage and go into learning winemaking. Um, you can see more and more women in important positions in the wine industry in Israel, with porter and telling about wine, writing about wine, blogs, and so on. And I think that women's voice in the wine industry is very, very important, not just on the marketing and sourcing thing, but also on the winemaking. I think women can bring very interesting very interesting voice to the winemaking, and I'm totally sure that in the year to come we will hear and meet more and more women in the winemaking. Not only in the winemaking, the wine industry in Israel and in the world generally. Okay? You asked me about wine in our life as women.
Yeah, as part of our identity as Jews and as Jewish women.
Well, part of our identity as Jews, wine is, of course, thing that going up through all life stations, from the brit and to every Shabbat dinner, every kiddush. We just had Purim that we had to drink at the Loyada. We had Passover in front of us. We have to drink 4 glasses. And on the Lori just told us you were in the wedding. So in the wedding, the ceremony, the Jewish ceremony, it's always, or at least in the majority, is a lot combined with wine, and I think it's beautiful. The first blessing in the Chatanah, Boret Geffen, and I think it's beautiful. So as a Jew, I think it's obvious. Wine, it's very important part of our time, of our religion. I can see, by the way, more and more religious women who told me that they didn't used to drink wine and be part of wine and to enjoy wine, and now they're more and more had more knowledge about the wine world and more like wine, to drink wine, not just as part of the ceremony, but as part of the of every part of life. And as women, I just say, I mean, wine can make us free sometimes, can help us to put some blocks what we have in front of us aside and be more who we are. So I say we need to adopt it and let it be more part of our life and be more and more who we really are. And sometimes wine can help it be like that. And you know that the wine world has changed as well. In Israel, especially, we used to drink wine only on a very specific moment, and just drink wine with glasses like that, and be very, very sophisticated about it. And now you can see some change coming in the wine industry in Israel, where we tell people, and I can tell that Maya, the brand of Maya is very much, and it's just be cool about it. Don't be sophisticated. Be whoever you want to be. You want to drink wine, your wine cold, drink it cold. You want to put ice in it, put ice in it. That's fine. You want to drink just from a glass without a leg, that's fine. You want to drink it red, you want to drink it white, you want to drink in the evening, you want to drink in the morning, well, sometimes just be who you are. And I think that's very important for us as a person, but definitely as a woman to take it just not just for how we drink our wine, but to all the way we are looking at life. Let's be more courage about be who we really are.
I think that's a great message, to be unapologetically ourselves.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lital. And I understand that you're very busy before the Passover season, so
I'm still here in the winery.
yeah, she's still at work, a working woman. So we'll let you head out as we begin the rest of the questions for our panelists. And of course, we can continue to sip our amazing wine.
Please enjoy. Thank you.
Yes, and you can find all Tulip's wine in the USA or Israel at Israel Wines, ISRAWines.com. And if you purchase there, all the profits go to help the Israel Innovation Fund's charities. So thanks, Lital. I'll let you sign off.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And without further ado, we'll jump into the questions for our panel. So this year's campaign theme for International Women's Day 2021 is Choose to Challenge. And as this has been a challenging year, to say the least, and from challenge comes change, I'd like to open the discussion by asking each panelist what you believe has been the greatest challenge that you've tackled this year as a leader, and what change do you hope that it makes to individuals, women, Jerusalem, Israel, the region, or the world? And it's a pretty big topic, but I ask you guys to please keep your answer to around 1 minute because we have many topics to cover. So we will start with Michal.
Hi, first of all, thank you so much for having me here for such a meaningful discussion. And I just wanted to say about Tulip Winery, for those that haven't toured there, it's truly an inspiring place to visit. In the way that it creates inclusion, in addition to making great wine, of course, which we're so privileged to have this evening. And I wish, of course, we were having it together, but this will do. It's truly an inspiring place, Palatnik in general, and the fact that the winery, the Tulip, is situated there. I really, really encourage everybody to go visit there. So that's for that. With regards to your question, it has been indeed a very challenging year. And if I had to choose one thing that I think has been most challenging, it is in the way that COVID-19 has affected the lives of so many personally, the lives of each woman, man, child around the world, and certainly in the state of Israel. And in my role as an MK, and actually, you sort of alluded to the representation and the voices of Olim. And it's not just Olim, it's of course all of Israel's citizens. But in fact, there was an additional component in this challenge for Olim, in that, of course, people who have left everything behind is certainly immediate family, parents, and children. There was an additional component of the implications of what it means to not be able to travel, to not be able to see, to actually even just psychologically have to accept the fact that even in an emergency situation, it is not so simple to just hop on a plane. And actually the most touching for me And it was right at the beginning of COVID-19, in my engagement with the public and in becoming this sort of constituency office, which received thousands of emails and phone calls from Olim. I received an email from an Ola who was due to give birth. Her name is Judith, and realizing that she was due to give birth, knowing that she didn't think her mum was going to be able to come and be here for the birth of her first son. And I have to say that probably the most sort of empowering and also humbling situation that I was in was the ability to actually create an extension of the criteria, so that in addition to lone soldiers that I was able to extend the criteria for, having been a lone soldier myself, that's always deep in my heart, and Bnot Shirut, the understanding that Olim, rather Olot, who were giving birth in Israel on their own without being able to receive a visit from family members, with all the implications of what I just said, both physical help and just a hug and emotional needs and so on. That was truly a rewarding moment in being able to extend and enlarge and enable those Olim and Olot to receive visitations from parents. And actually, Judith and her mother came to Knesset in really one of a moment I won't forget, just to thank me outside of the Knesset with the baby. And her mom said to me, you know, I was going to swim across the ocean. So thank you for doing this, because I didn't have to swim. And just that realization, it's somebody who had given birth far away from my own mom, and the understanding of what that looks like, what that means. And I think especially today on, you know, International Women's Day, and as we mark that moment in each woman's life, I think that it is really of the most trying challenges of this year and of the most rewarding for me as an MK.
Wow, that was a very powerful story. And thank you for your advocacy in that. I'd like to go to Fleur now. What challenge have you tackled that you hope has brought change to perhaps women, Israel, Jerusalem, the world?
So first of all, I want to say happy International Women's Day. And I think this is fast becoming the favorite Zoom of the day, possibly the week. So here's to my sisters in arms, Michal and Laurie. I just want to strengthen a couple of things that Michal said and then go on to my own challenges. On a personal level, I have a sick mother in Gibraltar who, before the corona, I would visit every 5 to 6 weeks. And now I visited her for about 3 weeks in October, as soon as I could get out. And I'm, please God, going to visit her this weekend. And it's been 6 months that I've seen my mother. So Michal, thank you for the wonderful work that you do. And for having our voice, that voice in the Knesset, to represent Olim and the challenges that are very unique challenges to us. You know, Israelis that are born here and have families, you don't understand what it is to have a parent abroad, especially a sick parent abroad like me. And so that work and the work of the committee of Sachi and Negbi and my friends like Rachel Broidy and Dov Libman really makes all the difference in these things. Okay, so I will start also with the Corona challenge, or I'll take it from a different angle. You know, today has been a day of celebration of achievements, but today has also been a day for me of protest to the rights that women still don't have. And one of the most basic rights that women don't have is the right to get a divorce. And we've seen some of this in the press, but the lockdowns that have happened in the last year have been especially bad for women in abusive homes and abusive situations, because they were stuck with their enemy, which is their partner who've turned against them or who are always against them, or who is the biggest challenge that they face. And the corona, which for those of us who are lucky enough and privileged enough to live in homes that are safe, with safe partners and children, that we've enjoyed that time together of playing with our children and hanging out as a family, have been a complete nightmare for the women who live with their husbands who are their enemies, who are abusive. And so today, after doing a celebratory Zoom with my UAE crowd, I went running to a protest outside the Rabbanut for the women who have suffered violence against them and who the Rabbanut do not protect and the state does not protect, to get them out of those marriages. And Laurie, this morning I had the privilege of meeting your daughter, who was there filming.
Yes, Shoshana, yes.
Shoshana, who was there filming the protest and was doing a documentary, I understand, on such an important issue. And so I think the biggest challenge, that Jerusalem is the largest population in the country. We've got enough on our heads with Jerusalem. It's also the largest, the population with the largest minorities, which are the Arab community and the ultra-Orthodox community. And believe me, no community is spared from violence against women. No community. The Haredim are no better. The Arabs are no better. The Adatim, everybody. It's a phenomenon that exists in every single community, in every single economic status of the different classes. There's no better and there's no worse. We've seen femicide, the killing of women by their husbands or the men in their lives, in middle class, and in the same way that we've seen in the working classes. And so I think as a society, we have to look and say, women's rights are human rights. And why is it that Israel, and I'm a religious woman, I do not accept that there are no halachic options. I do not accept that Judaism is against women. Judaism is not against women. It's about the people who are interpreting Judaism and not having any courage to release those women in these abusive situations and violent situations. And so today, I guess, is the pinnacle of the year of the abuse and the violence against women, when we came out in force on International Women's Day and we said enough is enough. And the message to our leaders, to the Knesset, is the minute there is violence in the family, this should constitute an automatic get. And in the next Knesset, as a Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem, as a city councilwoman, as a member of the Likud party, I will be advocating very strongly for the Knesset to pass a law that when there's violence in the family, it means an automatic get, and override the lack of courage by some of the rabbinical leadership that we have in this country.
Thank you. That is absolutely right. And it's unfortunate that these problems within Israeli society, they're not limited just to the Jews, but it's the unfortunate thing that brings us together. Lori, I'd like you to tackle this question as well.
Okay, thank you so much. It's such an honor and a pleasure. And I really am so happy because I know Fleur and I know Michal, and they're fantastic, incredible women here in Israel, incredible leaders. And it's really a zechut, it's a merit to really be on the same panel with them. So as in your introduction, like, I'm a founding director of something called Momentum. And we brought over 20,000 basically unaffiliated Jewish mothers from all over the world to Israel in the last few years. So our flagship program begins, it's really a momentum year of growth, but it begins with an 8-day immersive experience in Israel. Over half our women have never been to Israel. And of the other half of these mothers, their last memory was the soldiers are so cute because they were here when they were teenagers. And I tell them the soldiers are still cute, but they're your son's age. So this is our flagship program. The skies close, the planes are not flying, they're grounded, and the borders close. So what are we going to do? So I'm not going to say we pivoted. I think we pirouetted. We immediately saw that, I said this year, 2020 was a combination. It was Gilligan's Island meets the Jetsons. So only Michal here probably understands this cultural reference, because I also grew up in Canada. Gilligan's Island was a show about people, and we were all on our own island, and the Almighty decided who you're going to be shipwrecked with. But it was also the Jetsons. God gave us all this incredible technology that we're able to still be connected. But we knew that if the pressures that these mothers, that these families were under all over the world, but if we could keep the mothers strong, we had first responders for the body. We realized we had to be first responders for the soul. We're getting calls and messages immediately from women contacting us saying, help, what do I do? And as Fleur said, marriages, like a spotlight was in the homes. Some of the things we saw in the homes, we were happy with. My husband and I usually are with 850 people. We're scholars in residence at these fancy, Pesach getaways. And suddenly it was just the two of us. It was honeymoon Pesach. So it turns out I don't just love my husband, I like him. And by the end, he said, I liked it so much, don't tell the kids. But some people didn't have that situation. Some people were in a situation where their marriages were hanging by a thread. Somebody contacted me, they said their son came back from college and she said, I always thought my son, I thought I had a great relationship with my son, but now that we're quarantined together, I realize my son hates me. What do I do? Is my marriage over? How do I save my relationship with my son? We were there. So we immediately pivoted. Everybody went into marketing, and because every challenge has opportunity. So we had live daily webinars with experts to help them, to strengthen them. We had, we did podcasts. We started an e-magazine, and I, sitting at my dining room table in Yerushalayim, in Musrara, I was able to travel, and all the other leaders of Momentum all over the world, just from being here because of this technology and having reunions with the women and giving them chizuk and strengthening them through this time and holding down the fort. Instead of reaching 3,000 women a year, which we usually do, we're reaching 3,000 a day. So as a leader, usually I'm running through airports and I'm on the road. Every morning I would wake up, where am I? And is it Shabbat? Questions. And, I was able to the opportunity, and we see going forward that we don't have to be running all over the world in order to reach people, that nonprofits and organizations had to reinvent themselves in a positive way, to think out of the box, to take that and to go back. We're hoping this year it's going to open up, and we're going to welcome a group of mothers of lone soldiers this summer, and women and men are going to start to come again in the fall and winter. But now that we see that we can reach them online, the sky's the limit.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Lori. And I'm going to pose a new question to the panelists. So International Women's Day is meant to celebrate the social, economic, cultural, and political achievements of women. So in that respect, what achievements in Israel, or perhaps regarding Israel and the relationship between the diaspora and Israel, should we be celebrating? So let's start with Fleur.
Well, I think for me, obviously, there's the main achievement of the year, with a very challenging year, has been peace with more Arab countries, normalization with our neighbors in the region. This is where I've been very active in the last 6 months. I think we're all privileged to be living really historic times. It's good to celebrate, and I believe that women are actually a very important part of this bridge building and this peace building time that we're living in. Last June, a friend of mine and I, who's been very active in the business in the is really picking up. At the time, I was in touch with David Friedman, Ambassador Friedman, and the wonderful Aryeh Lightstone. We were talking about projects we could do in Jerusalem with Gulf countries. And so I knew something was up. I certainly didn't realize it was going to happen so quickly, but I kind of had this feeling something was up. So my friend Dorian and I, in June, we said, let's just create something. Let's create a body, build it and they will come. That's kind of my philosophy. And so we created this UAE Israel Business Council, certainly not thinking that in August, 2 months after, we would have the declaration of the peace accords that were signed. So we created this organization, and then all of a sudden we hear this incredible declaration. Within a few days, we created an online platform. Today, I'm very proud to say we have 4,000 members of our community. What's even more impressive is that it's about 45% Israeli, 42% Emirati, and the rest are like Jews from different places and people who are excited about the Abraham Accords. And then shortly after that, my friend Justine Zwirling and I, Justine had built this thing called the Jewish Women's Business Network a year earlier, a year and a half earlier in London. And we looked at each other and we said, well, if something's happening, we have to create a women's initiative as well. Because like I said, women are natural peace builders, women are consensus builders, women are bridge builders and networkers. And so we created the Gulf Israel Women's Forum, which I'm very proud that Michal is also a part of. And Lori, I invite you to join, please, with your experience of building bridges. You would be a fantastic addition. And so we decided that we were going to go full speed ahead and just create these relationships that were going to build peace from the bottom up. It's very well when you sign peace deals from the top down. We see what happened with Jordan. We see what happened with Egypt. These are strategic peace that was signed. Unfortunately, they never came down to people. And all of a sudden we had this opportunity. They were excited, we were excited. Boycotts were not going to continue. Incitement was not going to continue the way that it did in Jordan and Egypt. And I was asked one day to join this Zoom with people from the Gulf. And the next thing we knew, we were building friendships and different forums and the council that we built. And so for me, really the most exciting thing to happen in the last year, and I think that women have had a very important role in this, is the Abraham Accords. I'm getting emails every day from Morocco, where my mother's from, that they want me to be involved in a business council in Morocco. I'm involved in cultural initiatives. I'm putting my city, Jerusalem, the capital city of the state of Israel, at the forefront of this relationship. We've got an art exhibition happening in September between Dubai and Jerusalem. We've got educational exchanges, academic exchanges, you name it. Everybody's running towards each other. And this is really such an exciting time to live in. And the most exciting thing about it is that my kids, who I dragged my family to Dubai for Hanukkah. By the way, so did half of Israel. There were 70,000 Israelis. And I'm also very pleased to say lots of Arab Israelis in Dubai, in Hanukkah. Everywhere I went, all I heard was Hebrew. And what I'm most excited about is that for our children, this will be the norm. This won't be something particularly exceptional or special. They will just grow up in a world where Israel and the Gulf countries are friends and regional partners. And this to me is something incredible that happened this year. Something certainly to celebrate, and to celebrate on Women's Day, because women are also Emirati women. There's a misconception that somehow they're repressed. They're absolutely not. They have a council there, which is the equivalent of the Knesset, where 50% of the women, 50% of their council are women. Alevai aleinu, as Michal knows, 25% of the Israeli Knesset are women. 20% of my city council are women. They're doing better than us. And we have to go towards that 50% of representation in the Knesset of women and in local government.
Absolutely. And representation is something that we're planning to talk about soon. So I'd like to hear from Lori now. What achievement should we be celebrating?
So it used to be that the one thing that Jews in the diaspora could agree on is Israel. Our support, our love for Israel. And unfortunately, that has eroded in the last few years. And all the conferences that I used to have to attend, and I'm so happy that they're online because I don't have to travel, because it's the same people often talking about the same things. And the Israel diaspora divide, the Israel diaspora divide. And I don't really, and sometimes you don't really see change coming. And I have to tell you that we decided at Momentum, you know what, if we could only just meet. So we started bringing Israelis onto the buses where women would come. And the people gave me some very good advice early on. They said, Israelis are like, you have to, if you concentrate them, they'll turn on you. So instead of having a bus of Israelis, what we would do is we'd put 4 Israelis on every bus. We now have over 600 Israeli women who have experienced Momentum with their diaspora sisters. And it turns out we have so much in common. And when they find out that we really share the same values, and our diaspora women are in awe of these Israelis. The Israelis are so proud to share their country and to talk about serving in the army, and that their kids go into the army. And women in the diaspora, their kids are like, drinking and partying on campus in college, and they see the qualitative difference. And so our Israeli women, the 600, they started a new program this year. Because they want to continue in learning and being activated, because they learn and they gain something from the diaspora women. And we created like giving circles here and ongoing learning about their own Jewish identity, because their identity is so I'm Israeli, and sometimes the Jewish aspect of it is lacking. So everybody was catching up. Our diaspora women were connecting to Israel, and the Israeli women were connecting to their Judaism. So this program that we started this year is taking the Israeli alumni, and because they fell in love with each other, they're going to now connect and twin with a new family, like Olim, because when you're like so many of my friends who want to move here and so many who have moved here, it's not easy. It's not easy for me to navigate. My Hebrew is terrible. My husband, thankfully, his Hebrew is better. But sometimes I feel like I'm deaf, like I'm just like sort of like getting by and like, kind of catching on. And if you just had an Israeli family to say, I'll help you. This is how you sign up for this. This is when the government says that, they actually mean this. Then why don't they say that? Because of the government, they mean this. Just to help, to hold your hand and to help you and welcome you here. If you just had somebody to call and say, like, how do I do this how do I vote? Or how do I find a dentist? How do I navigate the health system? How do I navigate the banks? I've never walked into an Israeli bank and achieved what I wanted to do when I walked in. And it's really, so if we could bring them together, it's so beautiful to see that how much they love each other and the connection that they have. And we've had many, many, many families make Ali, they fall in love with Israel, but a lot of people don't make it. But if you could have somebody to be a soft landing with their arms open to help them, that could make all the difference in the world.
Amazing. Thank you, Lori. And Michal, I'd like to ask you the same question. What should we be celebrating? And just as a reminder, this is hard because I'm enjoying every second of your answers, but we're getting several questions. So in the interest of time, let's try and keep the answers to about a minute or so.
So
Michal.
I'll avoid repeating, what we should be celebrating that actually both Fleur and Lori touched upon, which are like the internal Israeli resiliency, or the internal resiliency of the Jewish people and Israeli society, and also, of course, the historic moment of the Abraham Accords, which I think we should be launching by next year, Fleur, the Sarah Hagar Accords, in order to really fully benefit from this incredible paradigm shift that we're witnessing to the 3 S's, beginning with the yes to recognition, which enables negotiation, ultimately paving the path to peace. And just to touch upon that for 1 second, I will say that what's most touching in the bottom-up sort of people-to-people warm peace that we've seen, and Fleur talked about the tens of thousands of people, of Israelis, actually Jews and Arabs alike, that were visited the UAE. I think what's most incredible is actually the longevity or the sustainability that we see for this paradigmal shift. From the very moment of recognition of Israel's right to exist as Jewish and democratic, so mutual recognition, but that's what it means to recognize Israel in that case. It's also taken a very real translation into the curriculum being taught in the UAE. So tolerance and the Abraham Accords are already integrated into curriculum. And actually that sort of mirrors an Arab teaching law that I hoped that I would be able to push forward in our own Knesset, because I believe that is our responsibility. And when you think about the potential, and this is where I wanted to go with that, the potential of both what Lori spoke about and what Fleur spoke about in terms of taking that internally to our own Israeli society, to the resiliency of the Israeli public. So if we say that the pivot away from the 3 no's to the 3 yeses, yes to recognition, yes to negotiation, yes to peace, if we are able to turn that inwards, and actually empower the voices of moderation within Israeli society, Arab voices of moderation within Israeli society, empower those voices and hear them, that actually enable them to speak up and say, yes, we are your partners in what we recognize as the Jewish and democratic state of Israel as it was founded to be, with an indigenous people returning to an ancestral homeland 72 years ago. And alongside that, the importance of mending the many challenges in terms of the paradigm shift that's necessary to create what Lori spoke about. So the engagement with diaspora Jewry that enables our own identity as Israelis as well to thrive and prosper. The finding of identity at a time, and I remind us all, we're living at a global crisis where people actually are looking to connect to their identities. And by the way, the multiplicity of identities, and I often say this to Olim, just Olim who have come from elsewhere, bring with them an innate understanding of the multiplicity of identities. And that is something that I truly believe, and just to reiterate what Fleur was saying about the historic time that we live in that sense, we, as the founding generation of this incredible miracle that is the state of Israel that is only 72 years old. At 72, Canada still had residential schools, I remind my Canadian friends. We are a work in progress, and the responsibility we have is tremendous, but we are the founding generation. And I often speak about the privilege and the responsibility that we have in the founding mothers and fathers that laid the physical infrastructure of this country. Well, we have the responsibility to create the second tier, the spiritual infrastructure, if you will, of this country. And we have to do it together, recognizing that the state of Israel is not just, a Jewish and democratic country founded upon the principles of the Declaration of Independence. It is also the center of Judaism. For the first time in millennia, the place where most of the world's Jews live is in this country. So we have to begin the conversation with our sisters and brothers in diaspora, and of course amongst ourselves here in Israel. And some of the very, very painful issues that Fleur spoke about, the imperative of what this Jewish and democratic country looks like, what that means in terms of, halakha and Jewish halakha. And by the way, I just said this, in the plenum last week. Halakha is not called Amidah and it's not called Yeshiva. It's called halakha. That is the secret to its survival over millennia. And that is with greatest respect to Orthodox Judaism. That is said with love and with understanding that, for example, in last week's, we just had this, Supreme Court decision with regards to recognizing non-Orthodox conversions. Well, yeah, we're going to have to deal with reality in every way and every realm of life and where it intersects. And yes, we should be celebrating those, I would say, failures alongside accomplishments, alongside achievements, because those failures are actually what draw leadership to taking responsibility in a much more heightened way. Certainly, they create a deeper sense of responsibility.
Okay, Michal, your video cut out just at the very end, but I appreciate the very relevant answer. And I'd actually like to continue with you. I have a question that is on many of our minds. Though we have a fabulous lineup of influential leaders, women in such positions are few and far between. So where are we going wrong? What should be done to change that reality? And what does feminine leadership and female voices bring to the table? And you can answer from your experience in the Knesset.
So first of all, thank you for that question. And actually, the most important thing to recognize.
Okay, I think that Michal's video is cut off. Is it cut off for you as well?
What else? And sorry, is it okay? What I wanted to say that's the most important for us to understand is what women bring to the table, just like everybody else, is viewpoint diversity. The imperative to have gender parity around the table is not for the benefit of women. It's for the benefit of the entire public. If it's for the benefit of the entire Israeli society, for the entire Jewish people. And so when we talk about issues that are important to sound, women's voice around the table, it is because that benefits everybody in every committee that I sat in. It is, and this actually pains me to say, like in the Women's Status Committee, the only man was actually the chair of the committee. All the other members were women. By the way, he's the second man in history to chair the committee, and I have no problem with that. What I'm looking for is gender parity in the Women's Status Committee. And I'll tell you, as somebody who served as a commissioner for the prevention of sexual harassment at a very important academic institution in this country, it was very, very frustrating to enter conferences for all of the commissioners for the prevention of sexual harassment and walk into a room of 200 women. So long as we are talking to ourselves, there is no chance for change. We cannot be in these echo chambers, but that is something that has to come to the realization of everybody. And just to tell you that on a technical front, I was a co-signatory to a very important bill, which actually creates an incentive, right? So additional party funding to parties that actually list. We started very humbly with asking for 3 women among the first 10 in every list, and ultimately coming to complete gender parity. And when there is more, and I'll share with you that in 2015, again, Canadian, so the Prime Minister of Canada, Trudeau, nominated a gender parity cabinet. And in the scrum, when the reporters sort of come and sort of ask their questions, one of the reporters asked the Prime Minister, 2015, Mr. Prime Minister, can we ask you, you spoke about a gender parity cabinet. We see that there are actually 50% women sitting behind you. Can we ask why that is? And Trudeau actually completely sort of stared at him and was silent for a good 2 minutes and looked at him and said, because it's 2015. And that is ultimately where we need to get to. And it is 2021. It is not for the sake of women. It is not for certain issues. Do you know there has never in history, in Israel's history, been a chair in the Defense Committee, in the Law Committee, in any of the finance committees that are women? And when we look, and again, COVID-19 invented nothing. It has only shone a big spotlight and sort of exposed things that each country needs to be made aware of, probably each individual, but each country needs to be made aware of. In that context, when we look at countries that are actually run by women, and when we think of the communication, that those skills, their ability to empathize, their understanding that even though the guiding logic behind the decisions changes all the time, because here we are with a global pandemic, which nobody knows exactly how it will play out, but we have to make that information accessible to the public in order to earn their trust, in order to deserve their trust. To talk about communication with women, oh, that's clear to us. I know I'm looking at Fleur and I'm looking at you, Eliana, I'm looking at Laurie, and I know you're nodding and saying, of course, we just need to make that information accessible to the public. You would think that that's, very, very simple, but those are the most important fundamental sort of, let's call them soft skills, that leadership, that female leadership brings with it, that's so intuitive, that understands the imperative to communicate. And I'll say one more thing about the state of Israel and where we're at the moment. We are at a crossroads in terms of our sense of mutual guarantee. I for several years already, for about 5 out of the last 6.5, I've actually been involved in the legal struggle of 4 mothers, the mothers of Hadar Golden, Oron Shaul, 2 deceased soldiers, and 2 civilians, Avera Mengistu and Hisham Asayed, to return them to Israel. 4 mothers. And there is now a huge women's initiative of women getting involved in understanding that we have to raise our voices on this issue. There are things we don't need to explain to women. I mean, I can talk as an international lawyer and make accessible the importance of highlighting that they are held in violation of international law and a standing violation of international law and so forth. But there are things that we can make accessible to women and that they can represent better than anybody, because they are intuitively in tune with what we are saying, with the messaging of 4 mothers that are awaiting, 2 for their, for their sons to return home. They know nothing about them, and 2 for their sons to be buried so that they have a gravesite to visit. Those are the things we still have ahead of us. And as I said, Israel is a work in progress, and sounding of these voices, ensuring viewpoint diversity around all decision-making tables, so that we don't need laws like the one which sadly, because the Knesset dispersed, actually was not advanced in this last Knesset. We have to continue ensuring that. And of course, Fleur in the municipal level, and Laurie in empowering the women in every way possible, so that we continue sounding these voices and demanding representation around decision-making tables.
Thank you. And Laurie, do you have anything to add?
I think it is a crime that incredible women like Michal are not going to be in the next Knesset, and that women become tokens on slates. Yes, we throw in a couple of women just to be Yotzi. And I spoke to Michal, and I'm gonna say to Fleur, because I know that she's an up and coming voice. I know that for sure, in the municipal Jerusalem, but I'm hoping in a national way in the future that I suggested to Michal, we need a women's party in Israel. Like you could, the taxi drivers had a party one year, all right? You can create, but not be for women's issues. As Michal said, to have women's voices in the Knesset. The countries led by women by far did better in 2020 with COVID than countries not led by women. Iceland, Taiwan, Germany, New Zealand. Women leaders, okay, women's voices. We need women's voices, and to pass a law that a certain amount of the slate has to happen, must happen. But it's so sad that that's what we've come to. Serve side by side with the men, that they're the soldiers that are out there, the female soldiers. It's, you know, we did have Golda Meir for a few minutes, but we've never had a female president, and I'm perhaps Miriam Peretz is going to be our first. We need women's voices, women, as Michal said, it's in terms of compassion, in terms of understanding, in terms of seeing the big picture, that men's egos are amazing gift that God gave them, which drives them to success, but it's also the boulder that they trip over. And women can come together. I've seen it with momentum. The achdut v'lo achidut, unity without uniformity. And I believe that our time has come. And Michal, this is ridiculous. And I've spoken to some other people about it, and I think this is something that should happen. And I'm sorry, I'm going to be waving this flag until something ends. And this is it. It's just like, if not now, when?
Thank you. Fleur, is this a challenge that you deal with in the municipality, being amongst men and not having enough female voices?
Well, let me just start with my main premise. We live in an unbalanced world because 50% of the decision makers are not women. Bottom line. And like Michal says, it's not just good for women, it's good for men. One of the most painful things happening in the state of Israel right now, and I have a lot of sympathy for men and their problems, believe me, is the fact that divorced fathers have very, very few rights in this country. I'm a feminist, but I can also, I'm a fair person. I can also recognize when things are skewed against men. This is one of the things that's skewed against men. But I'll ask you a question. If women were making 50% of those decisions, not especially, but 50% of decisions, do you think that it would be as unfair as it is? I don't. And this is men, not women. So for a more fair society, fair laws, we need 50% of women in decision-making positions. That's it, bottom line. How do we get there is the question. How do we get there? And so for me, I look back and I look at little girls. I have 2 daughters and 2 sons. And one day, I just tell you a small anecdote. One day I'm in a school parent-teacher meeting, and I'm sitting there in the school and I'm looking around the classroom, and you know how, we're very patriotic in Israel. So we have the war leaders, right? So we have a picture of the Prime Minister, Bibi. We have a picture of the President, Ruby. We have a picture of the Ramatkal. Then we have a picture of the chief rabbi, because it's a religious school, Sephardi and Ashkenazi. Where are the women? So of course, my girls are sitting around in class every day as 50% of their classmates, and they don't see any female role models as leaders of the country. Yes, we have Golda Meir, but I don't know whether you've heard in psychology, one of my interns once told me there's this thing called the Golda Meir syndrome. What does it mean? Once and never again. We had one time, yay, check, and we didn't have it again. And so we have to ask ourselves, how do we get to 50%? Because I'm not satisfied with anything less. Don't tell me 30, by the way, we used to be 30%, we went down. I'm not satisfied with anything under than 50%. How do we get there? And it starts with the education of our girls. A woman who is a little girl who is kind of assertive, she's bossy. A little boy who's assertive, oh, he's going to be a leader one day. He's dynamic, he's charismatic. That's what's happening today, 2021. Girls are being given constantly messages. No, don't do technology subjects. That's not for you. Do Madei Ruach, do social sciences. It's better for you. You can't be in high tech as an engineer. There's so many ways that in society we're being told. Yesterday, for example, we had for International Women's Day, we had a celebration of women's sports. So I joined the Beitar women's football team, okay? And they're telling us they get way less funding. They get no attention. They get zero sponsorship. The government doesn't, when Corona hit, they were not allowed to play in group sports, but the men were, because men's sports is way more important than women's sports. This is happening in every single arena of society. So no wonder the women in politics are not 50% and they're 25%, because the message is given to little girls is when they look around their classrooms, you're not going to be a leader. That's not for you. So just to close in this thing. So 2 years ago, Facebook reminded me, 3 years ago, when I was frustrated by this whole thing going on in the classrooms, I said, I'm not going to let this happen. I want pictures of women in school walls. So I went to the Ministry of Education and I said, listen, we have, at the time, we have a governor of the Bank of Israel, Fleur. She is a woman. And Esther Hayut, until today, is a Chief Justice, the chairwoman of the High Court, woman. And I said to the Education Committee of posters in schools, apparently there's such a thing, I want more women. It doesn't have to be politicians, because then they'll say it's right wing, it's left wing. I didn't want to get into that. I want women who are trailblazing, who are women who are leading the arms of government in this country. Where are their pictures? And they said, well, it has to go through this committee and then it has to go through that committee. And I said, I have no patience. I decided to raise money and fund it ourselves. I went and I printed and laminated in the same format. This was the 70th anniversary of Israel. Same format as Bibi and Ruby and everybody else. And I did a Facebook campaign and I said, which school is interested in putting women's pictures on their walls? 200 schools responded to me. And I went to as many schools as I could. I also got messages from schools in LA and Australia. It was crazy. And I sent out these pictures and these kids put it up on their walls, these little girls. And this is what we need to do. Of course, not just that. The role modeling is important. That's why Lori and Michal and the work they do and the visibility of the work they do as leaders is important for the whole society to understand that women need to be 50% in leadership positions, because women leadership and the traits we bring, I'm a feminist, but I'm not a feminist who believes that men and women are the same. I think that we're equal, but we're not the same. I don't want to be the same as a man. We have special traits of consensus building, traits of bridge building, like I said earlier, traits of networking and bonding. And this is exactly what society in every country in the world needs in order to be a better and healthier society. And so 25% is not good enough. And I, like Michal, I don't believe that a woman has to be the head of the Women's Status Committee. But you know what I do believe? Haredi parties have to have women's representations, because those Haredi women are not being represented by their men. And I'm allied to a group of Haredi feminist women who want to be not in regular parties like we saw in blue and white. They want to be in the Haredi parties, because they understand that until they are equally represented in Haredi parties, Haredi women don't have a voice. And this is what we should be fighting towards: more role modeling, more representation, and making it illegal for Haredi parties not to have women. Until we do these things that can be entrenched in the law, we're not going to see a dramatic change. And this is certainly the things that we will continue.
Amazing. Amen to that. Thank you, Fleur. And I think female role models are absolutely vital to our society. And actually, this leads perfectly to my next question, which also Sherry Bolliker, I apologize if I pronounced that wrong, asked, who influenced you to be able to have the strength and confidence to do the work you do? And what should I do or say to my granddaughters to inspire them? So I'd like to start with Lori. You have a platform that reaches thousands and thousands of women. So what would you say to your granddaughters or your participants on momentum to inspire them? And what role models have you had in your life and your career up until now?
Well, I have to say, number one role model, I believe, in terms of being a strong woman, is my mother. And before her mother, my Bubby had a Russian accent, and she was a going concern, and she was super assertive. And I remember her with her hands on her hips and her rolling pin, screaming at my Zadie. And my mother went back and got her degree when we were in school. And it's not everybody's mother did that, and they didn't. My mother was a social worker. She worked for a feminist organization, but I was raised with a feminism of not whatever a man does is where it's at. It's people respecting people. The Me Too movement and the Time's Up movement now is much more reflective of what I was raised with. So a new wave of feminism is respecting me as a person and not objectifying me. And Time's Up. And there are a lot of men around the world who are scared right now because it's like TikTok and when is it going to be, when are they going to be outed? So it's a very different world. So my mother was really, I think, my role model for that. My son, 3 out of 5 of my kids are Israel, and we have 3 grandchildren. Two of them are in Israel, 2 little girls. So all my grandchildren actually are girls, and our 2.5-year-old Ahuva. So her grandmother on the other side is also a momentum leader. Like a friend of mine, Neely, her daughter married our son. They said it wasn't a shidduch, it was insider trading. And this little girl is so assertive. The Ganenet sent us, they sent a video to my daughter-in-law who sent it to us, and she's organizing everything and she's in charge of everything, Ahuva, and she's ordering people around. She's got this gene pool of being a woman and standing up and being a leader. And I apologize to my daughter-in-law. I'm sorry, but this is, we have to have role models. We must, and two Atlanta, rabbis, wise representatives came over to me when I spoke there a while ago, and with tears in their eyes. And they said, thank you. I thought they were thanking me for coming to speak. They said, no, thank you for giving us a platform that we can rise. We're not just the rabbis' wives anymore. We're leaders in our own right. And I think that the women who come from the diaspora and the Israeli women, seeing women in leadership, Momentum was founded by women, 8 women from across the left, right, Shomer Shabbat, not different. We don't have to be the same. We can be incredibly strong women, and we can focus on what unites us and not what divides us. And if we do come together like that, there is nothing that can stop us.
Absolutely. And someone asked on our Q&A to Fleur, who are the women that you chose to make pictures to be hung in the classroom? So Fleur, you can answer, and then Michal,
So it was the governor of the Bank of Israel at the time, it's changed now, was the lady called Karnit Flug, a very accomplished economist. And the other woman was Esther Chayut, who up until today is the Chief Justice, as we say in the UK. In Israel, I think they call her the chairwoman of the High Court, right, Michal?
President of the Supreme Court. Yeah.
President of the High Court.
Amazing. 2
ladies leading arms of government, the Bank of Israel and the judiciary. So, like I said, I didn't want to get into politics because then, we'd get into, but I thought if you have the chief of staff, why don't you have the governor of the Bank of Israel and the president of the High Court?
Great. And before we move on to our last question, I'd like Michal to let us know who are your role models early on?
So I'll be brief because I know our time is running out, and I'll say the following. First of all, like Lori, my mom was very, very brave. She raised me alone in Jerusalem until she married when I was 8 years old, and I moved to Canada. An amazing man. But my mom raised me alone in the 70s in Israel. And that is no small task in and of itself. And at the same time, she was the parliamentary secretary for the Likud party and Menachem Begin's parliamentary secretary. And so I was the beneficiary of not only running around the corridors of Knesset and having tremendous role models there, the likes of Esther Zion, really a founding generation of this country, of men and women alike that were extremely influential on my understanding of what I said before about our being, still the founding generation of this country, but also women, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention, like Avital Sharansky. And actually, my parents met around the Sharansky case. Natan Sharansky, my father was his lawyer at the time. At the time, he was known as Anatoly Sharansky, of course. And my father presented a legal brief called the Sharansky case to every head of state around the world, arguing a human rights case and cause for the release of refuseniks, of Soviet Jews that were not allowed to emigrate. And Natan Sharansky was the case and cause. And my parents, my mom and my dad, met because my mother was friends with Avital Sharansky. And you have to understand, Avital Sharansky rose to the challenge in a way that I will never, ever forget. So a day after she was married, she was allowed to exit the former Soviet Union and come to Israel, and did not see her husband, Natan Sharansky, for the next 12 years. That is something unfathomable when we think of challenge and we think of difficulty. And the courage to speak up, the courage to make that case, the courage to not give up, was something that actually I'll never forget. And finally, a third woman that actually I was really lucky to have at my own swearing in Knesset, and my maiden speech in Knesset, is a former Supreme Court judge before Esther Chayut. Her name is Miriam Naor. And Miriam Naor was actually the judge that I clerked for when she was a Court of Appeals judge in Jerusalem. As a young lawyer, I clerked for her, and is a role model in the sense that, and Laurie said this, you have to have role models. Every person needs to have role models, and actually also somebody that believes in you and tells you that you should believe in yourself at moments where you think to yourself, I can't do this. I just can't do this. And you need someone that says, yes, you can. And not only that, to empower another. And I think that we all have that tremendous responsibility now at the stages of life that we're in, but to also be the change that we want to see in the world. So both in being that role model and enabling others to become, the best version of themselves that they can be as women.
Thank you. So we've come to our last question, which is International Women's Day is also intended to mark a call to action for accelerating gender parity. So I'd like to know from each of you, what is your call to action that you'd like to pass along to our audience today? We'll start with Laurie, then Fleur, and Michal.
So I was learning with a group of Israeli women, and some of them are very, very upset. So upset about the leadership here in Israel, and so upset about they're angry at the religious, and the religious are angry at the secular, and one of them said to me, I just, all my friends, we just want to get out of here. Like, we're done. We can't stand it anymore. And that is not an option. We have to be part of the solution and not the problem. Every one of us has to ask ourselves, just like Esther Hamalka in an important story, we were placed here at this time for a reason. And it's not so that we can cut and run. This country, it's unbelievable. As Michal said, it's 72 years old. All right, 72 years old. Like, what? It's a baby country. That means that it's still growing, and we need to take the talents and the skills and the opportunities that we were all blessed with, and we need to pour it into this country. Change can happen. Positive change can happen. We don't have to be blind to the issues. Like, I'm not sugarcoating it. I love this country and I love the Jewish people. I also see their problems. I also see their issues, but we can focus on what is good, and that will get, and take the pleasure in that, and that'll give us the energy to come together. But we have to see, and women are amazing. Women are incredible. Women in Tanakh saved the Jewish people time and time again. And we can do it again. We can do it again. Don't leave, stay, be part of change.
Wow, thank you. Fleur?
That's a difficult question. What the one message? There's so many messages. I guess maybe I'm just influenced by my morning. I think we still are fighting for basic rights. And I think we need to really bring the idea of the fact that women's rights are human rights. And there's really no excuse for the fact that in 2021, women who are abused are trapped because of the excuse of religion, which is not really an excuse. It's just, it's an excuse, it's not a reason. And so for me, the message for the year is, let's do what Judaism gives us the tools to do. Let's not use Judaism as an excuse not to evolve and not to do the right thing, the equitable thing, the fair thing, the kind thing. Torah al regel echad, Torah on one foot, is to love your neighbor as yourself, to treat the person the way you want to be treated. And so for half the population not to have that very basic right of freedom is ridiculous. So in the next year, as well as focusing on strengthening women in high tech, which we do in the city, and all sorts of other projects that I'm involved in for the success of women, for the flourishing of women in careers, we need to really, fix house in the sense of the very, very basic rights that we need to provide all women. So that's what I want to be focusing on in the coming year. And I invite everybody to join this struggle.
Thank you. Michal, what is your final call to action for our audience?
So I think it's really important in terms of a call to action for everybody to recognize the power that they have. Look, we're heading back to another election, back to the sovereign, back to the people. The people are the sovereign. And until the public raises their voice, first of all, it needs to be empowered and acknowledged that they have that power in their hands. And with that power comes tremendous responsibility. And I believe that everybody has the ability to make change in their circles of influence. So for example, there's an initiative called The Pledge. In every panel that you're invited to speak at, in every opportunity that you have to make this point, just to ask the question, are there going to be 50% women on this panel that you're inviting me to? Because if not, I'm actually not so interested in participating. There are very, very key components to everybody leaning in order for this difference to be made. It's not going to be enough. And I say this as a lawyer and as a legislator, it's not going to be enough to have a top-down approach where we change things in legislation. This is about, and Lori spoke about it and Fleur spoke about it, this is about educating the public. It is taking a little bit of responsibility, extra responsibility, personal responsibility, so that we can take collective responsibility. And Fleur spoke about the moral responsibility. But it all begins with personal responsibility. And everybody has that voice, and everybody has the ability to sound that voice in whatever circles of influence we have. I feel tremendously fortunate to be in a panel among such incredible women here tonight, and every opportunity that we have to engage in these kinds of conversations with additional, not just women, men, young, old, because as I said, everybody is a change agent, and we need people to actually raise their voices. And I've seen this time and again in all kinds of contexts, that at the end of the day, leadership is not just, and we are a nation of leaders, it's not just about a top-down piece and the recognition of leaders somewhere up there to understand what needs to be done. We are a nation of leaders, and we are a nation of female leaders as well, just as much as male leaders. And so it is up to us to lean in and to fix everything we see that needs mending, and to really bridge the gaps that need bridging, whether they're in terms of Israel's internal resiliency and the painful things that we've discussed, whether they're in terms of Israel-diaspora relations and the imperative to challenge paradigms, to create new relationship paradigms, and of course in terms of my own understanding and the challenges that Israel faces in the international arena as well. And by the way, it will not hurt us in the international arena to actually represent those female voices, so that when we see for the first time, an American vice president, a female Black president in the United States, well, we have a ways to go. And as Fleur said, not the Golda Meir syndrome, oh, we've had one and it was so long ago. We need to do it now. Our time is now. So thank you for the opportunity, and I hope to have continued engagements like this so that we can all actually spread this forward and, ignite the fire that makes other people, take that call to action.
Thank you. I want to thank our panel of incredibly well-educated articulators of Jewish identity, of Zionism, leaders to Israel, to women, and to the Jewish world. And thank you to the audience from all over the world for your participation and your compelling questions. I wish we could have gotten to them all, but as Michal said, it will be a continued conversation. And as I finish my glass of wine, I'd like to remind the audience that you can plant a vine through JNS and Wine on the Vine. So thank you to JNS.
Eliana, thank you for
Thank
your
you.
wonderful work that you do in JNS, highlighting these stories. You're incredible, really.
Thank you, Fleur. I appreciate that. All right. Have a Laila Tov and
Bye.
L'chaim.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Bye,
you.
ladies.
Bye.